So it looks like Google may have used private health data for targeted advertising. And I'm not buying it. This is one of those times when that intro doesn't quite make sense. Hello, this is a channel where I make fun of marketing and talk about marketing resistance, and today is yet another instance of a very personal situation that that I hope will serve as a way to talk about a bigger issue. This wasn't just an idea I had, it kind of slapped me in the face, and I've been trying to pick up the pieces and find a way to talk about this constructively. So here's what's been going on. Well, ultimately, I got two identical emails from Blue Shield of California. If you're from outside of the US, Blue Cross Blue Shield is one of the largest insurance providers in the United States. They said, hey, this is a privacy notice. And I was like, oh, okay, probably nothing big, but I should check this anyway to be a responsible adult. And I was very surprised to see that these emails explained that it was very possible, if not highly likely, that Google Analytics and Google Ads had taken private health data based on your interactions with the Blue Shield of California website and used them for targeted advertising, which, if you're wondering, is most likely very illegal, and if not explicitly illegal, really deeply problematic. So what I'm going to do here is explain the specifics of the situation itself, what actually happened as far as we know based on the information we've had so far, and then expand that to a bigger discussion about targeted advertising, of course, and the degree to which we as regular human beings have to be extremely involved in trying to make sure that our personal data is not being used for nefarious purposes, or just, purposes that do not have our best interest at heart, which summarizes all of marketing. If that sounds interesting, feel free to stick around. If not, I have plenty of other videos I've posted so far, and I'm always working on more, so I'm happy to have you here. Okay, let's get started. To give you a lay of the land, I'm going to rely pretty heavily on actual reporting and commentary of this whole situation, since I'm definitely not an expert in any of the topics that we're going to be covering today. Now, I promise that this is not going to turn into one of those channels that just reads you portions of the internet. I just don't want to speak out of turn and get things wrong. So I'm going to start by quoting from Blue Shield of California's official statement that I received in my inbox. They also posted it to their website at some point. Quote, like other health plans, Blue Shield historically used the third-party vendor service, Google Analytics, to internally track website usage of members who entered certain Blue Shield sites. We were doing this to improve the services we provide to our members. On February 11th, 2025, Blue Shield discovered that between April 2021 and January 2024, Google Analytics was configured in a way that allowed certain member data to be shared with Google's advertising product, Google Ads, that likely included protected health information. Google may have used this data to conduct focused ad campaigns targeted back to you. We want to reassure you no bad actor was involved, and to our knowledge, Google has not used your information for any purpose other than these ads, or shared your protected information with anyone. Blue Shield severed the connection between Google Analytics and Google Ads on its websites in January 2024. We have no reason to believe that any member data has been shared from Blue Shield's websites with Google after the connection was severed, end quote. So what kinds of information may have been accessed by Google Ads? Because to be clear, unlike certain data breach situations, they're not saying, oh, we know for sure that this specific data has been accessed by someone. They're saying it's possible, we don't really know the specific. They have a whole portion of the statement that tries to address this. Quote, insurance plan name, type, and group number, city, zip code, gender, family size, Blue Shield assigned identifiers for your online account, medical claim service date and service provider, patient name and patient financial responsibility, and find a doctor search criteria and results, location, plan name and type, provider name and type. Okay, so not great. Now for reference, in the United States, HIPAA, which stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, is used to protect personal health information just in general. Certain information can only be shared if the patient gives their consent. That's the basics of what HIPAA is all about. So, what does the HIPAA journal think about this whole situation? Well, it basically says that given the circumstances, this qualifies as a data breach, even though it didn't involve, hackers or anything like that. So Blue wasn't wrong to call it a data breach in their own statement, though it does ultimately seem misleading. This site called Bank Info Security adds some really useful context, I think, explaining that federal regulators had warned of the potential dangers of using these kinds of trackers. It also explains that configuring these kinds of third-party services, stuff like Google Analytics, with your website is genuinely difficult. It's not an excuse for all of this, of course, but I do think it's worth noting that it's not like Blue Shield, clicked a toggle to illegally share patient information and then just forgot about it. There's a lot of actual development that goes into these kinds of integrations, so there's a lot going on behind the scenes. It's not as simple as it might appear. But the developers are not getting off the hook either. In particular, the users of the Hacker News Forum, who are now some of my favorite people on the planet, had a lot to say. I'll link the thread in the comments if I remember to do that. But basically, these folks are pretty upset about the whole situation, and they seem to be kind of shocked that Blue Shield's dev team did not know that this was happening and that it didn't come up in any security reviews. Anyway, you will not be surprised at all to hear that data breaches are not uncommon among healthcare and medical companies in the United States, although the majority of the events that I see listed on that HHS database are categorized as hacking or IT incidents. So in terms of potential legal issues here, it would likely come down to this being a massive HIPAA violation, or like a giant collection of violations for every individual patient who was affected. And a lot of the data that Blue Shield said was potentially used for targeted advertising is in fact classified as protected health information, or PHI. You'll also see this term come up a lot in research and discussions surrounding the use of AI in healthcare. In general, people are arguing about how PHI can actually be protected while also potentially using that data, that very sensitive data, to train healthcare AI models. I definitely don't want this to become yet another AI video, but we should keep in mind that even more sensitive health data is going to be put at risk now and in the future as AI implementation becomes more common in a lot of healthcare settings, because the use of that tech just necessitates the collection and classification of so much more data than before. And just personally, I have already had multiple doctors and providers just asking to use an AI scribe to basically record and transcribe conversations that we might have during appointment. That's just one small example, but like widespread use of that kind of tool would mean that every little thing you say during a doctor's visit would be saved somewhere. It would be transformed into a type of searchable data, and likely with a very high degree of accuracy. It's not such a big deal if the security of health data is assured, but it's obviously not. In a previous video, I summarized this channel as an attempt to kind of track those moments when corporate power crosses a line, in addition to the many lines that it's already crossed in the past. And this breach is one of the most obvious examples of line crossing in recent memory, at least in addition to all the other lines that have been crossed recently. Now, I'm going to use this word in a secular sense, but personal health information has been treated as sacred in modern society. And it should be. That makes perfect sense. Aside from the fact that someone's own health conditions and concerns are extremely personal subjects, knowing that this information is private and protected helps to promote trust between patients and their healthcare providers, which is a really, really good thing. For quite a while now, doctors and other healthcare providers have stressed that you should feel able to talk about any and all health concerns with qualified professionals, because if there's something you want to ask about, the sooner the better. these can potentially be matters of life and death. And stigmas attached to various health subjects just end up getting in the way of someone actually getting the care that they need. They can really slow things down or even completely prevent someone from getting some sort of care. And I'm saying this stuff because the so-called breach that took place at Blue Shield of California over the course of roughly 3 whole years, a little less, and other events like it undermine that trust, to put it pretty lightly. And it's not like we can isolate the telehealth component away from the rest of healthcare in general. Ever since that pandemic thing that happened a few years back, telehealth has quickly become an integral part of modern healthcare systems. I don't know about yours, but my healthcare provider, which is still one subset of Blue Cross Blue Shield, by the way, strongly encourages using an online account and online resources to manage pretty much everything. The potential illegal use of my data was not a result of some kind of shady internet activity on my part. I wasn't submitting health information on, risky websites. I only ever used the provider's official website. People's sensitive data was given away as a result of patients using their insurance provider's web services for very normal, very accepted reasons. Stuff like setting up their account or just requesting an appointment, even just finding doctors in their area. Regardless, the official announcement from Blue Shield of California tries to treat this whole thing like a much more typical security breach scenario. For one, it labels the email a privacy notification, which, as others have pointed out, makes it sound like one of those endless terms of service or privacy policy updates that we've all been conditioned to ignore at this point, with PayPal being one of the worst offenders in that area. But much worse is the seemingly boilerplate text at the bottom of this announcement that runs through a bunch of standard tips for protecting your online accounts. For example, stuff like check your account for suspicious activity, get a copy of your credit report, consider placing a fraud alert on your account. And by the way, these tips are completely irrelevant to the breach that they're supposed to be talking about. They already said that no banking or credit card info was shared. I'm really confused by the inclusion of this material. As I see it, it's either just here to make this seem like a really regular happening, or it's here by mistake because whoever had to put this together was not paying attention to the details at all. And I think that brings us to a really important point. The inherent security risks of setting up and maintaining dozens of different online accounts are incredibly serious. Security breaches can lead directly to fraud and identity theft, and taking steps to protect yourself using strong random passwords and changing them out regularly and not talking to scammers, that's all good advice, and it does benefit online security. But in this case, again, the users did nothing wrong at all, and there is nothing that the users could have done to prevent it in the first place. It wasn't a matter of ignoring the terms of service and not realizing that you've agreed to let your data be sold off. It was the result of a company doing an incredibly bad job of setting up and managing its own data security. And again, this is not my first rodeo with any of this stuff. I think I mentioned it in past videos, but just last year, AT&T let me know that a bunch of my personal information had been stolen and was up for sale on the dark web, including my social security number, which is an American's most sacred personal information of all. And it wasn't about not updating passwords. It wasn't about inputting sensitive information that wasn't necessary. This was theft of information that customers were required to give AT&T when they signed up in the first place. And the worst of it was that I hadn't been a customer of that company for about 2 years by the time this stuff went down. So while we've basically accepted that we need to maintain these online accounts just to do some very basic and necessary things, we now also need to confront the fact that no matter how great your own security measures are, the stuff you do to protect your own information, there are absolutely no guarantees that your information is actually going to be safe. And we have to accept that cyber criminals are not the only threats. The companies themselves can be so embarrassingly incompetent that they just give away your information by mistake. And then, by the way, they don't feel compelled, clearly, to do anything in remediation. Like Blue Shield of California didn't say, oh, by the way, we've got your back. We're going to give you something. We're going to help you out in some way. They just said, oh, look for evidence of fraud. I don't know. And I've seen people hoping that this recent breach will lead to really severe repercussions for Blue Cross Blue Shield, but the best that we can realistically hope for is a class action lawsuit or some kind of government penalties totaling maybe several $million dollars. And while being charged that much would be life-ruining for any of us human beings, for a company this big, it basically just amounts to an operating expense. And no, it doesn't really make a difference. The Blue Shield of California is a nonprofit organization. They're still bringing in plenty of money each year, making any kind of government fines a joke. I know this has been a lot of cybersecurity talk for a channel that is presumably about marketing, but I have not forgotten about Google's part in all of this and their reliance on targeted advertising. So, Google, it seems, based on what we know, was using incredibly private medical data as fodder for targeted advertising via Google Ads and Google Analytics for just under 3 years. That is a really long time on the internet, and so long, in fact, that I think it signals either malicious intent or gross negligence on Google's part. Allegedly, of course. I'm not making any legal claims here. Why would I do that? Either Google was aware that this was happening, or they weren't. And both of those options are really bad. Now, it's one thing to generate targeted ads based on someone's standard Google searches about flu symptoms, maybe. But it's a very different thing to see that someone has booked an appointment with an ear, nose, and throat doctor and then decide that they're going to cash in on it. Maybe this goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway in case we have some new viewers here. For someone of my persuasion who really despises marketing in virtually all of its forms, this kind of data theft is somehow worse to me than having my bank info or my social security number get out. Targeted advertising has persisted for many years, largely thanks to political lobbying, shifty legal loopholes, and a user base that doesn't really understand what their rights are with regards to this stuff or how to protect them. There are entire tech companies that end up creating a product not to offer a good experience for the users, but to collect data from those users that can then be sold off to whoever's offering the highest bid. And marketing people have been happy to herald the upcoming discontinuation of traditional web crackers and cookies online, because saying that stuff makes it sound like they care about data privacy. But what they don't tend to say quite as loudly is that they're all in for behavioral-based ad targeting, as if using people's own data and behaviors against them is fine as long as they're not attaching personal identifiers to that data. So I'm saying that this is basically all likely to get even worse in the near future. And while I do think that some harsh government regulation could minimize these kinds of events, that is extremely unlikely to happen here in the US anytime soon. As always, the EU has a much better shot. They've done a decent job of protecting people's data privacy rights so far. So that's all the sad stuff that really bothers my brain, but the sad stuff that bothers my heart is just how incredibly sleazy this whole situation is. I just think it feels violating. I've always been pretty guarded about my health, and that has led to me putting off a lot of stuff when I should have just talked to a doctor. I'd like to think that I've gotten better about it, but now I'm just going to have this feeling of being watched anytime that I try to seek care. I'm not saying that's a good thing to feel. I know that's bad. I encourage you to talk to a doctor, even if you don't have insurance right now. But I don't know, have I made my point clear? Just how gross this is on the level of basic human dignity? And even from a business standpoint, do you think this was even worth it? Like, do you think Google made enough money from patient health data to make this whole violation like kind of feasible in a way? Like, was it really worth it to advertise a bunch of prescription meds to me when my doctor was going to choose which ones to prescribe anyway? It hasn't been great, but I still want to make this video vaguely constructive. So what can we do about any of this? As for the Blue Shield leak, quote unquote, I am sure that the complaints will be made. I'm sure that there's going to be a class action suit soon enough. More generally, I think it's important to be aware of whether your health platform actually has robust security and whether they are collecting trackers based on your web activity. Again, you can check a given site with the inspect tool. You can also talk to someone a little more tech savvy or use dedicated websites for that stuff. You can also check to see whether a healthcare company has a history of selling off patient data intentionally or otherwise. For example, BetterHelp and GoodRx have both definitely done this, and they've been caught out doing this stuff in the past. If you're more tech-minded, there are ways to actively block third-party trackers online, and there's now a whole software sector that's based around requesting that companies delete lingering user data. So in a way, I guess this all adds up to one big reminder that data privacy actually is important for all of us, not just for people who want to get away with doing illegal stuff online. The real challenge comes from the fact that companies really, 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 really want your data, basically as much of it as they can get, and they're not going to change their minds about that. Laws would help, so let's try to keep that in mind when we're voting for people. Otherwise, please watch out for yourself, watch out for your friends, and don't trust any company that says they care about your privacy. Thank you so much for sticking around for the entire video. Other stuff is in the works. I'll see how quickly I can get that finished. In the meantime, I hope you're having a wonderful springtime season. I'm going to play some video games now and maybe edit the video. Until next time, please take care.